I'm Ashley, the program coordinator. Yes, this meeting is being recorded. Okay. Cool. I'm Ashley, the program coordinator for the Writers Guild Southern Office. In addition to being a fiction and nonfiction writer, I am an avid reader, so the themes around Freedom to Read Week are very dear to my heart. And I thank all of you for coming to participate in this important discussion about banning and censoring books. My co-host Jason Norman will pop on in a bit here too, and he is a author based in Edmonton, and he does events and programming for the Writers Guild as well. And then also as panelists today, we have Kate Gibson, Lisa Murphy-Lamb, and Majeen Matherin. So Kate Gibson, Kate received her MLIS from McGill University in Montreal before working at the Richmond Public Library in BC. After a year and a half there, she took up teaching English in Japan and finally settled down at the Edmonton Public Library in 2010. Kate is currently the manager of the Strathcona branch, the chair of Capital City Press, EPL's initiative to support local writers, and board president of LitFest, Canada's original nonfiction festival. Welcome, Kate, and thank you so much for coming. And then next up, we have Lisa Murphy-Lamb. She is an author, community builder, literary and arts programmer. As former owner of Loft 112, a literary community and art space in Calgary's East Village, Lisa won the Mayor's 2021 Sandstone City Builder Award and in 2022, the Queen's Platinum Jubilee Award. Important to building community, Lisa is forever on the hunt for interesting and important stories to bring us together. She does not censor her little free library. Welcome, Lisa. Thank you for being here. And then next we have Majeen Matherin. She is a Haitian-born spoken word artist and patient advocate. She's a person for whom the love of language and the alchemy of words is second nature. Her multilingual upbringing, French, Creole, and English, not only prompted her to begin experimenting with the potential and magic of language, but naturally compelled her into a deep love of poetry. Her work has been featured in CBC, Global TV, Skirts of Fire Festival, and the Edmonton Poetry Festival. She was selected as a participant in the 2022 mentorship program with the Writers Guild of Alberta and currently serves as a mentor with the Horizon Circle Writers Program. Thank you so much, Majeen, for being here. So I just wanted to jump in quick, first of all here. Kate, as your experience as a librarian, I would love to hear just first of all, I guess, your thoughts of all this crazy stuff that's going on down south and just the process of when a book is challenged and what is a librarian's role when this happens.
For sure. So to start with, like, challenging materials that libraries have is not new. It has always happened. It happens multiple times a year here at Edmonton Public Library. Looking at our lists, and last year we had 13 books challenged, or pieces in the collection, not necessarily books. And a lot of times they are coming from a place where someone is just concerned about the content, about it reaching sort of a younger age than maybe it should. A lot of times it's very innocuous like that. And sometimes when a book is challenged, we do move it from one place to another. We're like, ooh, that you're right. That shouldn't be in maybe the pre-K section. That should be in the teen section. So when a book is challenged at the library, most libraries have a form that we ask people to fill out. We have it available online, and of course all the staff at the desks when you come into the library can supply you with that. We like to have a conversation just to make sure people understand the process, because it's not, I'm not going to go and take that book off the shelf right now if you have a concern about it. It does go through a vetting process. We ask you to fill out a form that really gets to the heart of why you think this book is either in the wrong place or shouldn't be on our shelves at all. So we can understand where you're coming from, and then we take a look at the concerns, at the item, at reviews, at if there is sort of age ranges, all those kind of things go into our decision making, as well as our own selection criteria for what it is we collect as a public library. And then we respond. And most of the time the response is, this fits with our mandate as a public library, and we're going to keep it on the shelves for these reasons. We understand your concern, but a library has to serve a multitude of people and present a multitude of opinions. And so this is why it's going to stay. But like I said, sometimes it does mean you know what, this movie that we classified as a kids movie is actually teen, so we're going to move it into the teen area. So that's usually the process as it happens here at EPL and at many libraries across Canada. What is happening in the States is a bit more, it's a bit scarier in some ways, because there is laws being passed that allow people to be fired for not taking a book off a shelf, or for even expressing opinion about certain topics. So librarians are suddenly being put in this position where they're afraid for their jobs. I'm not afraid when a customer comes and has a complaint or a challenge or just some sort of concern. I'm not concerned that I'm going to lose my job because of this interaction, but librarians in some areas are. And I think that's scarier because a challenge book can be, we can talk through, we can say this, but all of a sudden librarians are going to start maybe not even buying the books. And so it's censorship that's happening kind of in the underground. You can't see it. And it's whose works are just not being heard because people are afraid of what might happen. And so that's scary to me. Obviously, we hear about things like Mouse being challenged and banned in some places, and horrible. I mean, it's a wonderful graphic novel. Art Spiegelman just talked last night for EPL about all of that. But people hear about that. It gets challenged, it gets taken off the shelf, people go and buy his books, and but if it's, a librarian just deciding, you know what, I'm not going to buy that book about two gay parents, that doesn't get heard about. That is something that's censorship happening just in the background and no one ever knows. And what marginalized voices aren't being heard because of here. And that scares me quite a bit.
Kate,
Sorry.
I had a question. About, can you give the 20-second synopsis on why Mouse gets banned from certain libraries?
It's interesting. I mean, obviously the topic, some from what I understand, from what this is going to be longer than 20 seconds. Sorry. Some of it is the content itself. It is a scary topic. It is about the Holocaust, and there is some very descriptive panels in there about what happened to people in Auschwitz. It is done as little mouse characters, but it still is quite harrowing. But I have heard there's like one challenge is the fact that there's a part where you can see full frontal mouse nudity. And that was actually what it was being challenged about. And that I was like, oh, if you read Mouse and that's what you got offended by, you're missing the point of Mouse. That's not what should be worrying you about this story. What should be worrying you is those mice are naked and skinny because they're about to be sent to the gas chamber. And that is more concerning and actually something we need to make sure people don't forget about. So, yeah.
It's the same thing I heard as well, is that there was a naked cartoon mouse. Do you hear anything about? Any rumors, whispers about people wanting to actually pass laws in Canada that are close to what is happening in the States, especially like Florida and Texas?
I haven't personally. I mean, I'm not necessarily in the conversations where those might be happening. I'm sure there are people that would like to do that. It wouldn't surprise me, but I haven't heard any concerns about it sort of that have filtered down to me. We just posted a blog yesterday on the EPL website about why it's important, why intellectual freedom and freedom to access information is a thing that we care about and is a thing that libraries across Canada uphold. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. But I'm sure there are a few people out there who would like to see it happen.
So thank you, Kate. Yeah, I actually looked through the list of the EPL list of historically which have been challenged. I just found it quite interesting.
It is.
I think the only one that I saw that actually got removed was just because it had like misinformation about vaccines, which that makes sense. Like that makes so much sense to me. But yeah, anyway, it's really
it's rare that things get withdrawn. It really is because this is outdated information, and that's something we want to make sure our collection is up to date. So that's the only one I've noticed. But like I said, a few times recataloging. But
which makes sense to me.
It does. And that is fully acceptable. We do like to share like our reasoning behind why we do every decision.
I found that spreadsheet really interesting. I think maybe I'll try to find a link before this is over and put it in the chat for people because I found it really interesting.
I've got it here. I can throw it in the chat.
Yeah, that'd be great. I found it very fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for that, Kate. And Lisa, I know that you had one of your own books banned in Texas, and I would love to hear more about that and your experience with having your own content censored. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. Yes, and thanks, Kate, for talking about it at the library, the Alberta library level. We as a family had the adventure of moving to Texas, Houston in particular, for a couple of years, and did not quite know what we were getting ourselves into at the school level. So at the time, my youngest son, Charlie, was in the second grade. And he was invited to, at some point quite early after getting there, he was the student of the week. And so he was invited to bring things about himself to the school. I think he had a bulletin board or a section of the classroom where he was allowed to bring things about himself to introduce himself to the rest of the classroom. And so one of the things that he brought was a book that I had written in 2003 called The Dinosaur Hunters. Because, you know, he wanted to brag about his mom being a writer. And I think it was there a couple of days, and then it was returned home in a brown paper bag from the teacher with a note saying, "We can't have this in the classroom. It has content in it that we don't find acceptable." Mainly being dinosaurs. And then I think also there was some drinking and smoking that some of the paleontologists might have engaged in. And so it had to come back in a brown paper bag, no less. So that was kind of exciting as a writer to have a book that was censored. So being there a little bit longer, we learned a little bit more about the process of Texas. And things might have changed now, but this was sort of around 2006, I think. So a lot of teaching is done through textbooks. A lot of teaching relies on textbooks. And because Texas is so has so many students, it has such a large population. I think Texas and California, but primarily Texas, there's the most sales of textbooks there. So they sort of control what happens with textbooks because the writers of textbooks, the publishers of textbooks want to make sure that Texas is happy. And so they have like the consulting groups of what's going in the textbooks comes from Texas, and they aren't necessarily educators or professors or those involved. They can be members of the community, and they often are members of the community, often right-wing religious people and people of affluence. And so they can control what goes into the textbooks. And so in 2009, I know that there was the leadership, the chair leader who believed that evolution is hooey. And this was a person, a decision maker. And so, and he was in charge of the new science curriculum and what went into the textbooks. And I know that during the social studies and the history, I remember being there and hearing that there was a group around the table and they were deciding which historic figures were going to make it into, and I don't know which grade, but the actual conversation was like, well, I've never heard of him, or I've never heard of her. They can't be that important. We don't need to include them into the curriculum. And so I mean, there was censorship right at the level of writing of the curriculum and the textbooks at the beginning. But when I was doing a bit of research, just to make sure that my memory was fact, I looked into, I didn't know the story at the time, but I guess it started ever since the 1960s. This has been going on in Texas because there was the right wing that was really worried about the indoctrination of the godless secularism, and also that the government wasn't being wasn't too much propaganda. But there was a an oil company clerk by the name of Mel Gabler and his wife Norma, who actually began the textbook crusade at their kitchen table. And so they were the leaders of the first wave of this censorship. And they brought their supporters to the State Board of Education meetings, unrolling their scroll of shame, which listed their objections they had for the content of the current reading material in the textbooks. And at times their scroll was 54 feet long, their scroll of shame. So, yeah, so that's why, especially in Texas, and it's, not surprisingly, it's a numbers game. It's the textbooks are being produced there. They're being sold there. And so that's why they have the sort of the most influence in Texas. And yes, my book got banned. And teachers don't have a lot of pushback. They're told what to do. And so, yeah, it got sent home in a paper bag.
So dinosaurs, like, what's the deal with dinosaurs in Texas then? Like, are they a fantasy creation then, or are they not even allowed to talk about dinosaurs?
Well, I was under the impression at the time that they couldn't talk about dinosaurs, that it was not part of the curriculum. But I don't know if that's fact. I think there has been times for sure that I think that evolution was not taught, that it was creationism based. I think for sure that happens, and it probably happens in areas, and certainly probably in some of the private schools, it's taught. But I don't think across the board that creationism is taught. But I know that it's probably still a hot conversation that happens there. But I think it's still, I think maybe there's probably even times where there's just not either taught, because I think there's fear of the pressure that's in the community. And I think a lot of censorship happens because of fear. If you get a parent group in, or if you get a Mel Gabler and his wife in, people will censor stuff because there's fear, as what's going on in Florida right now. Where is this pressure coming on librarians and school teachers as well? And so I'm sure there's teachers out there who have not covered up their books, and there's librarians out there who've not covered up their book stats. But I think there's a lot who have, based on fear. So I think creationism is still a hot topic in Texas for sure, but I don't think it's across the board.
Yeah, thank you. That is so interesting. And yeah, I mean, of course, the money made from selling these books is going to play a part. I didn't really think about that, but of course, like, it makes so much sense, but it's just so crazy when really the education of children should be the main priority, right? It's just, yeah.
So it starts right at the writing of the textbooks, the censorship.
Yes, that's crazy. I never really thought about it that way. Thank you, Lisa. Jean, I would love to hear from you as an artist, and how censorship affects kind of the art creative process, and if you've kind of had any experiences with censorship in your career.
Yeah. I was just still thinking about this conversation, or what you shared, Lisa, just around fear. It reminded me of something I read that from Toni Morrison, and because she was part of this collection of essays. I'm trying to remember what the name of I think the collection of essays was called Burning Books, and it was actually around advocating for it basically was a collection of different authors who wanted to write about advocating for freedom of speech. It's called Burning This Book, I think. And in it, one thing that she says is fear of unmonitored writing is justified because truth is trouble. And I found that quote really powerful um, and a stark reminder of the necessity to 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 share works that provoke people to ban, like to go to the point where they don't want that to be heard. In my own work, um I've never, to my knowledge, like I don't like to my knowledge, it hasn't affected any of my writing. But one thing I do have to say is that I think the as you know, as I'm writing, I do think that often there are topics that I want to write about that I worry might push, um might antagonize people, or might cause that level of friction. And um and I never really thought about like how, just learning or just like hearing about banned books, how that can affect your own like editing when you choose like which topics to delve into as a writer. And I feel like I'm realizing this now as we speak. So which is really interesting to think about. When I was looking at the list of different books that have like top books that have been banned, especially in the States, there are two books that come to mind. One that I guess is American, but the other one is actually, um, I wanted to talk about like the Book of Negroes in particular by Lawrence Hill. It's a book that was published, I believe it was like in 2012, and I think it's 2012. I read the book around like 2013, I want to say, and 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 it was the title that grabbed my attention. Um, and I remember reading it and realized, and it wasn't up like the book in and of itself really changed the way that I viewed Black Canadian history. Um, and um, and he made a huge difference in the way that I just interacted with. Um, I don't know. It just made me appreciate that history, um, in ways that I don't think I would have if I didn't read that book. Um, when I looked more into that particular book and the history of it, whether it was banned or not, one thing I learned was that apparently there was a group in Suriname, in Amsterdam, that threatened to burn the book because of the title. Not because of the content, but because of the title, which I found really interesting. And their argument was more around how it depicted Black people in the wrong way. It was but one of the things that Lawrence Hill argued when it came to he was very set on having that as the title of the book, because it was an actual book. It was historically facts that was a book that was the title of the book. And so, it's not like, I don't know. I think sometimes we think that it's like this big idea as to why people want to provoke, but like sometimes truth is shocking. And so I think recognizing like how much that really impacted the way that I viewed the world, along with Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, is the other book that I wanted to talk about, just because for me, as a quiet girl growing up in Calgary, I The Bluest Eye was actually one of the first books I've read when I was 16, um, that centered someone that looked like me in a way that I don't think other books ever did. And I know that like, and what's interesting is like, I never really thought about it being banned. But over time, I learned that the reason why it was banned, it was because The Bluest Eye was challenged as for having depiction of child sexual abuse and sexually explicit content. And what was interesting to me was when I read the book and, you know, there were those parts that describe sexual abuse. It was the first time as a 16-year-old that I actually saw that as abuse. Like and for me, that actually opened my eyes to actually be more to recognize what abuse was, even as a young person. And so for me, that informed me as I moved through life to actually recognize those things. Not only did it center someone that looked like me and in the way that the injustices that happen as a Black person, but also just like that in of itself, to me, also equipped me to move through the world in a way that was more with greater insight because of this book. And so I will forever be grateful for works like the works that Toni Morrison puts out, because it really, I think in those moments where I hesitate to write as truthfully as I possibly can, I think about those authors, and they give me more courage to tell the truth and to tell it plainly and as honestly as I possibly can. I don't know if I answered your question, but I just wanted to share that. I feel like I didn't, but
it's a good time to get to all of that you got to. I think I had I'm going to try not to make it a 3-part question, but a 2-part question. You're talking just based on everything you like just said, just up into the last word, thinking about all the ways that being a writer can be, or being an artist can be, or how writers and artists can be politically involved. Talking about banning books and censorship is one of the ways that we're actually directly involved in our own kind of art form. It's how we can be politically involved in that, because it's literally kind of, you know, but I'm wondering, just the first part of it is, do you see yourself as somebody that wants to be a political writer or wants to be involved like that? Or do you feel like it's the fight is coming to you more than you go into the fight?
That's a good question. I feel like my existence is political. Like that quote, there's a quote that says that, where, you know, as you navigate through the world, as I navigate through the world, I want to just speak for myself. As you know, as a Black woman, everything. I think it naturally gets to that simply because of the way that the world is, if that makes sense. Like, I think it's never intentional, but I don't want to say it's never intentional, because I do think that it is intentional, because I think in my writing, I tend to want to write about things that I don't see people talk about. And those are the things that motivate me to write more than anything. And for that reason, I would say that it is political, because it's about exposing the voices that aren't being heard, the stories that get, you know, tucked to the side and silenced. And so, to answer your question, yes.
The second part is, so we're the Writers Guild of Alberta. You've worked with us before and things like that. We, you know, and I'm just thinking about, how do writers in general, what can writers do in the face of, like, I mean, in your opinion, not, you know, but like, what can writers do in the face of this stuff? Like what I was saying before we started recording was, one of the main things we wanted to talk about today was how this is all just so crazy when we're talking about banning stuff in 2023 and stuff. So, but like, what can, so this is our art form, and this, this is the place that we want to kind of make our living or make our trade or whatever. And, what can writers do in the face of this? What can maybe people that don't see themselves as political, or whatever, like, what do you think writers as a kind of a community can do in the face of some of the stuff that we're still seeing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big question. I think my first thought is just around the necessity for writers to connect for community. Because I think as much as writing is a very solitary process, I believe in the value and the power of community to validate, to encourage, and to offer a breadth of like vantage points when we're working towards developing a story or whatever writing art form that we're endeavoring. I think there's so much value in having people around that can help us not withhold the truth from ourselves, because I think it's easy to self-edit when we're by ourselves as we create, as we write, and there's power in being able to have the community to develop and to work in a sense that will push us to tell the truth to ourselves and to the rest of the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
That does make sense.
Like kind of like form a united front and be there for each other and support each other's truth telling.
Yes.
Ashley, I didn't want to butt in. I was gonna have a question for Kate, but did you have something first?
No, I'm good. Go for it.
Well, I was just gonna thank you, Majid, for all that. I put you on the spot for about 10 questions there, but Kate, I had this stat, and it says during the 2021-2022 school year in the United States, more than 1,600 books were banned from school libraries. Now I know that's a little bit different. The bans affected 138 school districts, 32 states. This is according to Pan America. And then it says Texas and Florida lead the nation in book bans. And going off what Majid said a little bit, where she said the place wanted to ban or burn the Book of Negroes, because it was called the Book of Negroes. And the only argument against that was that's literally what the actual book in history was called. So we're having a little bit of this like 1984 business where just kind of like actual facts and truth are being kind of attacked, and we're living in this weird space. But I'm just like, want to go back to just the role that you feel that you're in as a librarian, and maybe just starting with the difference that you see in challenging something that maybe needs to be reconsidered or reorganized, but also and not kind of censoring challenging thought. Or I mean, I'm trying not to I don't want to stretch it into like vaccine misinformation, but I'm just like, what you think your role is in just being the kind of the person in between somebody reading something that is actually bad for them or just like garbage.
Yeah. It's a good question. Libraries, I mean, it's at their heart are about making sure people have access to information so that they can navigate this world, they can live in a democratic society. So our role as libraries and librarians is to make sure they have access to that, but make sure they have access to also good information. And so if you come up to the desk and ask me about a topic, I will find you well-sourced information on that topic, no matter what it is. And even if I don't personally like the topic, even if I'm like, oh, like, really, okay, but I will find you the good information on that. And that is my role. So I try not to censor anything any conversations I'm having with a customer that come up, and I do like to go to the extreme when I'm giving sort of analogies, but a customer comes up and says, hey, I want to find a good website on how to build a bomb. I might have like little like, oh, why are we doing that today? But also I'm like, well, okay, let me find you some good sources on this kind of mechanics behind it, because I can't assume that you're not just a writer wanting to know how to build a bomb so that it makes sense in your book. So what I try and do, what libraries try and do, is make sure you have access to the information you need and that it is good information. So again, the one book that did get removed from libraries, the EPL's shelves, was book that had outdated medical information in it, and we don't want that on our shelves for sure. So we have to navigate that role. Also, as a public library, every library has sort of the collections they collect. No one public library, no one school library can collect everything. So there has to be limits on what we buy, and we tend to get popular titles. So we're not buying textbooks that you get at a university library on medical stuff. We're buying the more popular things. So we always have to decide how that fits with our collection and what our customers need from us. Does that make sense and kind of answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the main thing is that, there's obviously has to be times when librarians are dealing with questions about things that they don't necessarily agree with for a variety of different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And as the Freedom to Read Week website says, we all have guaranteed charter rights to intellectual freedom and to think things that we want.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's about the putting the things into action, or the kind of, anyway, when thoughts turn to actions that start to harm, I think.
Different, yeah, but the actual accessing of information. There is an old cliche saying that everyone brings up when we're talking about libraries. So we say there's something on the shelf to offend everyone. There are books that will offend me in the library for sure. There's topics I'm like, but I know that it might be useful to someone. And so I'm not going to ask for it to be removed. I'll just choose not to read that myself. And we often say that when we're having conversations with people that come up. It's like, yeah, you don't want your child to read this book, and that is your right as a parent, but you don't have a right to demand other people not let others read this book. And so it's always having that conversation as well. And a lot of times it is just talking through an understanding of what libraries are. People don't understand why we have all these books and what the purpose of it is and what our role as sort of upholding intellectual freedom is. And so it's often just having that dialogue and making sure people understand.
And I was going to mention, if people had questions, they could start to type them in, and we'll get to them in a little bit. But one did come up that I thought was good for Kate, so I'll just read it now. It says, for Kate, is dialogue between libraries and publishers or creators to discuss updates when a text is out of date or inaccurate? So basically, yeah.
Sorry, no, it does make sense. And it's a good question. And one I don't actually know the answer to myself. I can look into it. If anyone wants to reach out to me, I can always follow up on that. I am not a collections librarian. We do have separate librarians here at this system who deal with publishers much more often. I'm not sure if that is the role of libraries to kind of say, hey, is that a date? But perhaps I honestly don't know, but it is a good question.
Lisa, you were somebody that kind of, well, I mean, you still do this, but with Loft, you were somebody that was creating community a lot between writers, but also you were bringing the community together to do things like kind of shared art experiences and stuff like that, like some of the stuff that Majine was talking about. And I'm just wondering, what were some of your experiences? Because I'm just thinking about this idea of, reading something that blows your mind and then makes you think differently about the world, but in a good way, and what it took to get people there, but along the way, there's probably a lot of other stories of people going to something and being like, I didn't like that. And like, you were somebody that was kind of like in the community a lot. And did you ever have to deal with a lot of things where people were just like, I want to support the arts, but I don't like this, or I don't, and how they weren't trying to censor, but maybe just it's at that basic kind of enjoyment level, just so we can kind of separate this idea of maybe they're not calling the library and trying to get a book challenge, but because there are these things like Majine was saying, if they didn't get to you, then they weren't able to blow your mind and change the way that you write and read and and operate in the world. So how many things did it have to go through to get to, to us?
I think that's a really good question. And you had asked the question to Jean earlier. And I think as writers and as a community builder, we still have to support those writers that don't blow our minds. Because if we want to have the freedom to read whatever we want and have the world have access to material, that sometimes means material that isn't what I personally, or my group of peers, my 30 group of peers or whatever that's in the audience or more, isn't blown away by. We still need to support those writers and their craft, because of course, it's like anything else. It's not an absolute. Writing or performing or anything is never an absolute. You're going to walk out in a crowd and have people, be weak at the knees from what they experienced, and other people who are really like, I can't believe I spent that money, or I spent that hour or two. So I think as creators and as writers, I think it's really important that we don't censor publicly. I mean, we can censor what we read. Like Kate said, you can walk down a library, a row of books, and you can choose not to write. But I think as writers, especially in our own communities, I think it's important that we don't publicly, especially if we're writers of influence, that we don't that we're careful not to disparage those that are sharing our same space with us. I think it's really important, because I think that's a level of censorship, right? Like if I'm an invited writer that comes to speak, and I decide to use that platform to let people know that I don't think that, I think Rupi Kaur is one that where people feel okay to say she's a terrible poet because she's successful off of Instagram. And I think people think that that's okay to say that among a group of like maybe university students or something. And I think that's a form of censorship, because, as a respected speaker, perhaps then I'm allowing I might be ridiculing people who might have thought that she was an okay poet, and then I'm telling you that she's not. And so I think that's a form of censorship as well. So yeah, I think that it's important to really be supportive, even if the feeling in the room is a disaster. Because we have all had moments of failure ourselves, and sometimes that failure leads to growth as a writer as well. If we don't feel like we have to walk away from writing because of the reaction that we got. So, yeah, I think unless what we've experienced leads to an action, a call to action of harm. But I don't think that was the question you were asking. Did it lead to a call of action of harm? Because I think that's where the next step is.
I guess the thing that I think one thing I take from that is, I think, whether you like another writer or you like another writer's work, I think for the most part the writers should be pit against themselves for a variety of different reasons. And when it comes to even the ideas that they talk about, maybe most so. And it's also because it's really the state that is to me, it's the state that's the problem. It's the government coming in and saying, we're going to make a law that says, if you write about slavery and it makes people feel bad, that's now illegal. If it makes people feel bad for being white, that's now illegal. Like, so I'm just trying to think now, it's like that's the kind of us versus them situation. But the call to action that I would want is, how do you convince the state that that's not going to be that bad of a thing to learn new ideas, or not new ideas, to learn. Now we have to learn old things, right? To learn truth. Then the truth will actually help us as a society. And you kind of have many of these places kind of saying no, because I think in the United States, they had the 1619 project, and the reaction to the 1619 project was to create the 1776 project. That's literally was like, America is great. And I know everything isn't about America, but it's just this idea that that's not really how you counterpoint that idea of slavery and how it built the United States. And just trying to, how do you get, because like, I think I agree with you, Lisa, about if I don't agree with a certain writer for a variety of reasons, that is going to be a thing that drags writers down in general, because the real thing that is dragging everybody down, writers included, but society down, is, well, censorship times 10, whatever's going on now, which is literally banning books and making laws that say how a book makes you feel is now up for a legal kind of discussion, which is like super weird. I will remind people they can watch, if they want to watch this recording after, just go to our YouTube channel. It'll be available there, and we'll share the oh yeah, thanks, Ashley. And we'll share the audio recording again shortly. But Ashley, did you have anything?
I just wanted to say, Lisa, I really think you really nailed it when you said, as long as something's not a call to action for harm, because I think that's what the bottom line is here. I don't think, as writers and as creators, I don't think there should be any topic that's necessarily off limits. Like if someone wants to write a well-researched, sensitive, work about the Holocaust or about slavery or these horrible things that have happened in history, then that should be okay and encouraged. It's just that the bottom line is that as long as it's not a call to action for harm, then I think, intellectual freedom, creative freedom is crucial. But yeah, I just think you really nailed it with that. And then I just wanted to say too, back earlier on, Kate, when you were talking about the fact that fear will stop librarians and schools from even purchasing the book. That's just something that's so scary. And I hadn't really thought about that. And then, because if a book gets banned and it gets publicity, then they actually get some pretty good publicity, and then the sales go through the roof and stuff. But then if things are getting banned without even, without even any of that publicity, and it's just really scary.
It is scary. And again, it's not going to happen as much to the big names. There'll always be these big name authors, and the books will be available, but it's the smaller authors, the less well-known, the marginalized authors that are going to all of a sudden there's not going to be a place for them to be heard, because people are just not buying their books. And that is horrible.
Yes. But yeah, I guess, well, we don't have too much longer. This has actually flown by. It's been such an interesting chat. But I just want to hear everybody. I guess, Majeen, you've kind of talked about your favorite band books. And I adore Toni Morrison as well. But yeah, Lisa, what's your favorite band book or one that you find kind of important?
I remember when I was teaching, I loved to teach Bridge to Terabithia. And I did. And I guess it was challenged. I don't think it was banned, but I guess parents objected to some of the words like pervert and lordy. And I guess there was a see-through blouse in it that offended some of the parents. So I don't remember that ever coming up in the classroom, but I was surprised how many children's books were banned for bizarre reasons. And I couldn't find this website again, but some of the children's books that had animals behave like humans, and some parents found that too fantastical. But I also just wanted to say before I finish talking that the Canadian government has actually banned books, which I did not know, that as a government that we've had books banned in our country. So starting in 1837. So did not know that.
Truth is trouble.
Truth is trouble.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And just at a quick cursory look at Bridge to Terabithia, one of the reasons was that because it contains an elaborate fantasy world that might lead to confusion. It's we
don't
want to confuse our children at all.
There's actually the American Library Association keeps a list of the top banned or challenged books every year. So they put out every year the top 10. And Bridge to Terabithia was in 2003 challenged because of occult Satanism. So
Oh,
Yeah.
wow, it's been banned for many reasons.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's always something.
And what about you, Kate? What's your favorite banned book?
I mean, I like a lot of books that have been challenged over the years, but one of my favorites, just as a concept, and one of the most challenged books actually out there, is a children's book called Untango Makes Three. It is a picture book, and it is about two penguins raising a baby named Tango, a baby penguin named Tango, and they're two male penguins at the zoo, and it's based on a true story. Two male penguins who raised a baby penguin themselves, and it gets challenged almost every year by people all over, definitely all over America. Although I believe I did read somewhere that it was challenged and removed from Calgary Catholic schools libraries at one point in the past, like 10 years ago.
And for the reason that there were two males raising it, that was the only reason?
I believe so. We do have there was a blog that got put out by EPL of children's books that have been challenged, and they have the reasons why and when they've been challenged, and that's great, a great list of children's books that everyone should read.
That was number 50 on the list of 50 most banned books in America.
Yeah.
Was the Tango book.
Tango
I remember studying children's literature in school, and one of the first things you learn is, for the first like 150 years of children's literature existed to like scare children into submission. And it was maybe until like the 20th, like the mid 20th century, when people were like, maybe kids might just want to like stuff. That's an odd concept. We also didn't have almost any time to get to any of this, but it's worth noting, because once again, I think that this idea of like literally banning books, or like challenging, fine, but the banning, so many of these books on the top 50 list deal with queer kids, queerness, trans kids, interracial families, interracial couples, interracial relationships. And once again, it's 2023, and we could have probably just spent the whole time just talking about that.
Yeah.
And like, what's the list here? So Bluest Eye, number 4, number 2, All Boys Aren't Blue. It contains mention of sex, masturbation, and profanity, making it the number 2 banned book of the 2022 school year. Now, once again, this list I was looking at is from schools, but that's almost makes it worse. And number 1, Genderqueer, a memoir. Once again, talking about like literally banning somebody's actual true stories.
Especially after hearing Majine talk about how profound reading a character and an experience was for the first time in a book,
It's blocking up people from being able to
blocking up, and that's the gorgeousness of reading books.
It is
one of the gorgeousnesses of reading a book is when you can identify with a character, and so to be able to ban, and it's the fear, right? It's the fear that you might introduce an idea or a lifestyle that's too scary. But
it is interesting to look at those lists through the years and see, because the themes and what seems to be the fear at the moment changes. And so right now it definitely is anything to do with trans, LGBTQ. That is definitely one of the top ones in the past few years.
Before it was like religious,
or like
Satanism,
sorcery,
irreverent to God, and then racial issues.
I have a friend who he grew up during the Satanic Panic, and he played Dungeons and Dragons, and he lived in Hinton, and it was banned from being played in the school. He wasn't allowed to play it in Hinton. So everyone just came over to his house because his parents were cool with it. But he lived through that, and it's like, it wasn't that long ago.
Fear is the big word of the day. I mean, Toni Morrison doesn't need me to stick up for her ever, but I just can't imagine just not reading those books that I read, and just how kick-ass of a writer she is. So like I said, she doesn't need me to stick up for her, but kudos to her for having 2 books on the top 50 probably every single year and pissing people off. But it's you know, that, you know, it's one of those things, right? If you become big, then that's a thing, right? It's nice to kind of piss people off. But when you're just trying to get something published or something in a magazine or whatever, like the fact that these kinds of thoughts trickle down to people like that maybe they run a literary magazine or a contest or something, that's the kind of, you know, the kind of poisonous kind of censorship that you want to keep out of, you know, our world for writers, because then you're definitely going to prevent the kind of grassroots from encountering stories even earlier than having to be like, you know, get to the Toni Morrisons of the world, which are like the kind of cream of the crop. But yeah, we are just at 1 o'clock, and I just want to thank everybody for joining us and hanging out and watching. We got a few good questions, and people are asking about the recording, so it will be available later. And thank you very much to our speakers this panel. This was so fun. It was nice to do this during the day and kind of like chat. Like I said, I think this whole thing is ridiculous, and the fact that it's still happening, but it's important to kind of talk about just talk about it in general, but just also talk about the fact that this is not a foreign concept. There are active kind of measures in play, and you know, it's our job to kind of shout those out at the very least. So Majine and Kate and Lisa, thank you very much. And Ashley, thank you for co-hosting here. And anything else to wrap?
No, thank you all so much too. I just wanted to just close with one quick thing. I just had wondered if you guys had seen the Margaret Atwood put out a version of The Handmaid's Tale that's unburnable. And I just think it's so cool because she's just such a cool woman. And here, I'll just put a link, but it's made of all fireproof materials, and it was all the sales of it have gone to go to PEN America's like kind of fight like to support free expression and stuff. And I just think it's awesome, and she's awesome, and there's a lot of people fighting this good fight, including all of you. And so thank you so much for this conversation. And yeah, I mean, it's fertile ground. We could probably talk for a whole other hour, but yeah, hopefully we can all chat again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Have a good day.
Thanks for
Thank you so
having
much,
me.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.